Hi, in this video, we'll be presenting what is telephonic counseling. In our team, we have Anu, Bhagirathi Nag, Caroline, and Jessica. I'll be starting with what is telephonic counseling, how does it work, and some of the characteristics of telephonic counseling. What is telephonic counseling? The use of telephone has gone way beyond answering initial calls. So now telephone is considered as a professional tool for counseling. In telephonic counseling, it refers to any type of psychological service provided over telephone. So this service can be provided by a psychologist, a counselor, a psychiatrist, a social worker. Anybody who gives any kind of psychological service on telephone is considered as telephonic counseling. So telephonic counseling ranges from individuals to couples, or it can be group therapies, where a professional therapist sits with a group of counselors on a conference call and can have a group therapy just like a face-to-face session. So telephonic counseling is different from a helpline. Telephonic counseling is very similar to a face-to-face counseling session that happens with a consultation with an agreed fee. Okay, let's see what APA defines telephonic counseling as. So APA defines telephonic counseling as a method of treating and managing the problems of client by telephone. The skills of telephone counseling include careful selection of problems that lend themselves to the medium, active listening for cues to issues and ramification of the problem, good verbal skills that guide the client appropriately, and the ability to respond quickly to avoid gaps in awkward silence. So as part of telephonic counseling, a counselor is expected to listen carefully, have clear verbal skills, and respond to the client's need based on the issue. So how does telephonic counseling work? Okay, telephone counseling may include sessions that are entirely conducted via phone or maybe combined with face-to-face interventions. So it can also be a session where the counselor is meeting the client face-to-face and they choose to have a few sessions on telephone. A caller may seek information from a counselor about any topic, any issue of interest, including advice about a specific issue, general information, referrals, intervention, or crisis counseling. So just like a face-to-face counseling, a client may come with any issue. It can be for information, just referrals, or for a counseling session on a particular issue. So telephone counseling can be divided into 4 characteristics. So let's look at each one of them. Intake, triage and assessment, replaying information, follow-up. So we look at each one of this in detail. Intake is the first interaction with the client. During this session, the counselor is talking to the client with no visual cues. So the counselor is expected to be more careful on giving more chance for the client to talk and picking up verbal cues more than the visual cues. A counselor asks as many open questions as possible to obtain as much information from the client during this intake. Mostly in this intake session, the counselor gathers information about demographic information, the presenting problem, and some other basic information that's needed from the client. Second is the triage and assessment. I'm just going to move this over. Triage and assessment. In this stage, the counselor assesses different aspects on the call. So first thing is the client's suitability for telephone counseling itself. If the client is even qualified to have a counseling session in this mode, because a client who is high risk may not be an ideal case for a telephone counseling. So a counselor has to assess if the client is suitable for telephone counseling. The client's level of knowledge to a certain presenting problem, how aware the client is of the presenting problem, how the client has been handling this problem, is also something the counselor assesses in this stage. And also the level of risk. The client may be a high-risk client, a low-risk client. Counselor has to ask suitable questions to identify how risky the situation is, if the client would harm themselves or somebody else. All this has to be assessed in this stage. Okay. The next stage is replaying information. So therapists should give information at reasonable pace. First of all, the counselor should be aware of the client's private location. Because it's telephonic, the counselor may not be aware of where the client is sitting, who's around the client. So counselor should be very mindful of when the counselor is replaying information back to the client, and also do it at a very reasonable pace so the client can understand. A counselor has to maintain a very passionate, compassionate voice through the entire telephonic counseling session. Counselor should not raise voice or should not be in a hurried voice, but maintain a very compassionate voice. And continual reassessment of client's emotional status. A counselor, because it's telephonic, there's no visual cues, neither can the client see the counselor. So the counselor has to be more vocal about reassessing the client's emotional status. The last stage is the final stage, a follow-up stage, where documentation has to be done immediately after the session and a follow-up has to be scheduled with the client. So these are the 4 characteristics of telephonic counseling. Over to Anu for the benefits of telephonic counseling.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Post the pandemic, we've seen telephonic counseling becoming very popular when people were locked up at home and they didn't have access to transportation and other modes of reaching to a physical place for counseling, for a face-to-face counseling. So, Caroline, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So, let's see what are the benefits of telephonic counseling. Traditionally, we could not imagine counseling being done on the phone. Counseling is always a service that you always wanted to do face-to-face, but the pandemic rather accelerated the practice of telephonic counseling, and there's been huge benefits that has come out of this mode of counseling. Now, what are those? We were in a lockdown for a long period of time, and with no access to actual mobility or transportation, or to comply with the restrictions of movement, we had to stay at home. And during all of these periods, telephonic counseling has been of huge help and support for people who were themselves affected by the pandemic, or their families were affected. They could, while availing physical health services, they could also be supported by counseling through telephones. So that was a huge help. And with the telephonic counseling, there is a whole other set of people who come into the realm of counseling. For example, elders or elderly people who have mobility issues, who have to depend on family or friends to take them to a counselor. Now they have access to counseling through telephone, the medium of telephone. And it could be scheduled at a time that they wish to, at their convenience and at the convenience of the counselor. You could have children access counseling services because it's easy to stay at home and to schedule a counseling session with the presence of parents or caregivers, etc. So the range of people who availed of counseling services earlier has now increased with telephonic counseling. You also have people who have physical disabilities or people who have lack of transportation, people living in remote areas or rural areas who have no means of traveling to a physical location, are now availing the benefit of telephonic counseling. So accessibility has increased largely with the advent of telephone. And now, of course, it's moved on to much more advanced digital devices, to video counseling, Zoom, etc., etc. So this has also resulted in a huge cost benefit to the clients by making it very affordable, because there is a limited duration for which you're charged. You are saved of the transportation costs. You're saved of the time that you spend traveling, or other dependencies that you may have, which will incur cost. And now it's much more affordable, and it can be repeated as often as required. And unlike the earlier face-to-face counseling research has proven that 93% of the people who avail telephonic counseling want actually to continue with telephonic counseling and not return to face-to-face counseling. Also, the dropouts are much lesser in telephonic counseling, and there is much more effectiveness where simple problems are solved in brief therapy sessions. Convenience is, of course, a major factor when you consider telephonic counseling. You can schedule it at your convenience, at your home, at the time that you want. When you have a little privacy, you don't have the risk of your colleagues walking into the room or be interrupted by any other distractions. You can continue at the convenience of your home, in the privacy of your home, and so is privacy. So you can have as much privacy as you want and schedule it at a time that you wish to avail of counseling. And generally, these days, it's available round the clock. And that's a huge benefit, because you wouldn't physically be able to go to a certain brick and mortar location 24 hours of the day, but you can definitely have a phone call any time of the day you choose to, if it's available to you. So there are a few other advantages as well. This is also convenient to the counselor, because you do not need to spend time physically moving to another location to handle counseling. You can be at your desk wherever you are in the comfort of your home and offer counseling services. It also has increased acceptance. If it is on the video mode, you can observe the client, you can look at the body language, you can look at the client's expressions, and have almost the same effect as a face-to-face counseling. In fact, you're much more observant when you are on a telephonic counseling, and you're very the counselor pays much attention to the voice, the tone, and the tenor of the client to understand what's going on with them. And it's definitely the most attractive to Gen Y and Gen Z. They are used to having all services given to them at the click of a button through apps. And that's the mode that they would like to. And they're very happy to be in an anonymous place and receive counseling services. And they're more open to it. So can you go to the next one, please? So you can just click on all of them. Yeah. So there are different types of therapies that are useful during telephonic counseling. It could be person-centered therapy, or CBT, or motivational interviewing, acceptance and commitment therapy, or narrative therapy. Be it whatever the mode, these are still found to be really effective in telephonic counseling. You can go to the next one, please. Thanks. Addiction, anxiety, depression, anger management, bipolar, or even eating disorders can be counseled through the mode of telephonic counseling. And these have been found to be very effective. Of course, not severe cases. If there are severe cases, you would have to refer to another authority. But generally, if it's a fairly simple case, you can have telephonic counseling being very effective. And with that, let me hand it over to Jessica who will take you through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Annapurni, for giving us insight into the benefits of telephonic counseling. We will be looking at some of the challenges of telephonic counseling, first beginning with the therapist perspective. And the first point is rapport formation. Now, you know that the first most basic thing about any therapeutic relationship is rapport formation. Initiating therapy for new clients over telephone presents a unique challenge, as it may be difficult to build the warm therapeutic environment with an audio-only medium as compared to having face-to-face contact during an in-person interaction. Lack of visual expression and cues. This may hamper the non-verbal communication in a therapeutic relationship, as the alliance between the client and the therapist is based on communication that is verbal as well as non-verbal. When the visual cues are missing, it becomes difficult to observe a client's emotional reactions to what the therapist is saying. Also, it may be challenging to detect subtle affect changes that are reflected. For example, a shift in posture, a shift in gaze, through changes in facial expressions during the psychotherapy session are important cues for the psychotherapist, which he or she cannot miss. Connectivity. Now, technology, you and I know, brings along with it the uncontrollable factor of network disruptions. This can cause several dilemmas in a therapist, such as who is to be held responsible for the time lost due to network issues? Should I reschedule it or extend the session if there was a network disruption from my end? If there was a network disruption from the end of the client, then whether the client should consider paying fees for the loss of the scheduled time of the psychotherapist. Privacy and confidentiality. Confidentiality and privacy is one of the major things about counsel and client relationship. Now, the psychotherapy room is under the control of the psychotherapist, where interruptions can be prevented and privacy is ensured. However, in telephonic therapy room is susceptible to interruptions due to multiple factors that are beyond the control of the therapist, such as the client's home environment, sudden disruption from other family members during the session, possibility of the session being recorded by the client without prior permission or mutual consent, and the possibility of the phone call being tapped into by third-party hackers. Familiarity and training. Now, often psychotherapists themselves find it uncomfortable to use phone calls as a medium of relating to clients, as they are not used to it. Many psychotherapists prefer online videos sessions to telephonic sessions. In addition, there are no specific training courses in India which train on the online psychotherapy and the ethical and legal aspects of conducting psychotherapy on online audio and video formats. Delivering specific intervention strategies over phone or digital platforms. Interventions such as relaxation techniques, graded in vivo exposure, so on and so forth, it becomes difficult to deliver those strategies on telephonic call, and it may require many specific technical modifications to this modality to retain the effectiveness and the efficacy of psychotherapeutic interventions when offered over the modality of telephone or digital platforms. Now, a few more challenges from the client's perspective. Increased cost being the first one. The cost of psychotherapy sessions increase, especially for low and lower middle class income group clients, as they have to pay for the sessions as well as for the telephone call charges, as it is a norm for the client to make a telephone call. This may make therapy less affordable for clients who are already at a disadvantage when it comes to accessibility to psychotherapy services. Privacy and security, again, this applies especially to clients from less fortunate backgrounds, which have less personal space in their residences, as they live in households with limited space and more people in them. Also, irrespective of socio-economic class, many times the client's family members are not aware of the client receiving psychotherapy, and maintaining this boundary becomes a barrier to seeking telephonic psychotherapy from home. Connectivity, again, is an issue from the client as well as a therapist's perspective. Attitude towards an awareness of psychotherapy. Another client factor that may pose a challenge is the client's willingness to engage in telephonic psychotherapy. Face-to-face interactions may be preferred by clients compared to telephonic psychotherapy. A number of elderly clients are not keen on use of technology and appear to be more comfortable with in-person psychotherapy sessions. Also, with mental health awareness being poor in India, awareness of the possibility of telephonic psychotherapy is also likely to be poor. Changes in these attitudes and knowledge may be difficult to bring about quickly. Thank you for listening. Over to Bhagirathi Nag.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, this is Bhagirathi Nag, and I want to present do's and don'ts of telephonic counseling. And we will look do's of telephonic counseling. There are some important points to be noted carefully when attending telephonic counseling. They are such as pick up the call within 3 rings. Don't allow that to ring for a long time whenever you pick up the call. Second, smile. It looks silly. Why should I smile? The person on the other end that cannot see my face. But smile is reflected in your tone. Hence, smile when you pick up the call. 3. Be cheerful. Introduce yourself. Just say, welcome to Telemanas. This is Bhagirathi Nag speaking. May I know how can I help you? That's the way you should start the communication, and be cheerful. Introduce yourself and what you do and profession engaged into. Point number 5, request for the identity of the caller. Once the client speaks, ask, may I know your name please? Sir, may I know your name please, madam? So that should be very clear. 6, speak clearly, speak slowly, don't be in a hurry manner. Be honest. When you respond to the client, at the same time, have to be honest. Appropriate body language. The body language also will depict in your volume and the way you speak. If you don't have a good body language, that means even your tone and tempo does not very much match with that. 9 point, use polite words. When you speak to the client, how can I help you? How can I assist you? Please, can you explain more? Thank you very much for calling. Sorry to hear that. Those kinds of very important, pleasant words should be used. Allow the client to ventilate in counseling. Point number 10, ventilation should be the important first goal. Inquire about the emotions of the client, how he feels. Point number 12, empowering the client to make decisions. By empowering the client, you have helped the client to solve his own problem. Telecounselor doesn't mean you are there to solve everybody's problem. Lee Consult's main aim is to empower the client with the life skills so that he learns the life skills and goes and implements in other difficult areas of his life. Hence, you know to inquire the emotions and empower the client to make their own decision and solve their problems. Next, empathizing with the client to make decision is very essential. Next, paraphrasing and reflecting the emotions at the same time, we had to do that. And next, listen and give your full attention, undivided attention. Next, stay calm, reassuring and non-judgmental. Whoever it is calling, it may be from a different religion, from a different geographical place. He is a human being. These geographical places, religion, language, we have made it so respect the person on the other side. Next, ask open-ended questions. And when you are closing, please summarize. Summarization. Sir, madam, what I understood that mention summarization. It says, sir or madam, what I understood, and mention that, did I miss anything? Can you add on to it, sir? Is there anything else I can assist with you? So these are the words should be in your dictionary and should be prepared in every call. At the same time, there are some don'ts you should know. Till now we had seen do's of telephonic counseling. Now next, don'ts of telephonic counseling. First, vocal strain or match, strike, shouting. Don't participate in march, strike, shouting, going for IPL match. I'm not telling don't go. You please go there. Don't shout. If you shout, there is a vocal strain. Tomorrow you may not be able to attend the telecounseling services if you do this. Next, cough and cold. Please take leave, otherwise you will not be pleasant when doing telecounseling. You are coughing. Next, carrying things on job or distraction. That means taking problems from home to the job. That should not happen. That will cause distraction. You will not be able to give undivided attention to the client. Next, making sarcastic comments. Do not make sarcastic comments on this happen, how stupid you are. Don't tell that. So that point number four, making sarcastic comments. Do not make sarcastic comments on this happen, how stupid you are. Don't tell that. So don't make any sarcastic comment. Next, don't criticize the client. Don't be judgmental on his doings and on his emotions. Challenging the client. If the patient says, I'm feeling suicidal, don't make this comment. So if you are feeling suicidal, why are you calling? Don't do that. Don't challenge them. Who knows if by challenging him, I cut him attempt and death by suicide may occur. That should not happen. Next, 7. Comparing the client. Comparing just not may say, comparing just you may say that just now had a similar call and he had more problems than you. Don't do that. Don't compare between the clients. Each client is unique. Each unique survivor has a different fight he is placing and is playing. Hence, do not compare one survivor with other, one client with the other, and do not do that. Using speakers. When you are attending calls, telecounseling, taking to the client, use headphones. Confidentiality is very essential. And when you are talking to the client, don't put loudspeaker. Always be on mute position. Eating and drinking or chewing. Don't eat, don't drink, don't do and chewing gum. Don't do that. If the client comes to know about this, he feels dejected and feels that you are rejecting him. You are not giving undivided attention to him. Interrupting the client. Do not interrupt the client when the client is speaking. It is very essential skill further. 11. Interrogating the client. Why did you go there? Why did you go there? What was your job, whether you kicked him or not? So that kind of interrogation should not be done. You are a counselor. You are not police. Imposing your values or morals, judgments. Don't impose your values, morals, and judgments on the client. Don't say you have to be vegetarian. Don't say you have to be Hindu religion. Don't do that. Don't impose your moral values and religion values on the client. 12. Rejecting the client's concerns. The client may say, I feel I have cancer. Don't immediately say, how can it be possible? If you had cancer, you are not be calling the telemanas. You would be going to the hospital. Don't do that. Arguing with the client. At the same time, don't argue with any points or suggestions with the client. Labeling the client. Don't label the client by telling you are schizophrenia or you are bipolar, you are an anxious person. Don't do that. 16. Diagnosing the client. Don't diagnose the client who were the telephone because you are not seeing the patients. You are not examining him. You are on the call. Yelling at the client. Don't yell at the client. Giving unrealistic hope. Don't give unrealistic hope to the patients or the client, and please don't give unrealistic hope to the client. Scolding the client. Don't scold the client in any case. Lecturing the client. Being a genuine counselor, don't give lecture to the client. You have to speak in the session only 20% of the time and allow the client to speak 80% of the time. This was the do's and don'ts of the telephonic counseling. So when we are having counseling sessions in telephone or call, please do remember these. All the points are very, very important. Thank you.